I think first you need to ask yourself, are you a person that's worthy of having that partner's love and affection? Because if you're not, you should fix that first. I would really just encourage them to pray into, number one, where they feel God leading them. Like, what's easy? Like, where's your natural leadership ability? Like, what is just natural to you that you try to overcome with humility because maybe you are scared of walking that road? What I mean is, like, what do people naturally listen to you about? How are people drawn to you? What are people, asking your advice about? Why do they want to connect with you? There are things in our lives that, it's just so evident. It's apparent. It's natural. I don't feel incapable. I feel frustrated. I feel pent up and frustrated because I feel like I am a pendulum, like I'm a wrecking ball, and I've been towed to the top. So in the beginning of my life, my journey was really shame. I was running away from shame. Shame of coming from a broken marriage. Shame of, not having enough. Shame of sleeping in a car. Shame of not having money for school lunch. If I fell behind on a run during selection, I would destroy myself mentally. You're worthless. You fat piece of crap. You're not good enough to be here. You suck. Everybody knows you suck. You shouldn't be here. I use that in stage one to internalize, drive faster, pull harder, do more, do better, work hard. Work's over, guess what? You're putting in the extra hours. You're not good enough. Nobody thinks you're good enough. That drove me. I used that as fuel. I didn't have a lot in the way of identity in Christ as a kid. And I also didn't have a lot of means as a kid, but what I did have is the absolute love and time and support of my parents. I didn't know God as a kid. I did not. My parents said that they did, but they didn't. My mother was Jewish and my dad was pretty devout Catholic, and somehow they ended up married. I don't shy away from the pain. I just think, man, I wish I understood why, right? I wish I understood why, but I know, like, I'm faithful and confident that this is for a purpose. And I had the opportunity to join a special operations unit where, I got to go execute some of the highest value targeted raids in the world. Felt like somehow I squeaked through the cracks. Like, I don't know how they don't know that I'm not supposed to be here. I felt like an imposter every single day. It was the most stressed psychologically I've ever been in my life. I remember 9/11 changed my life. The day that I watched the Twin Towers fall changed my life. I see that pain as an opportunity to be shaped and formed by God, right? When I see pain ahead, I think, wow, this is really gonna suck, but I know that at the end of this pain is this unbelievable fruit that's just waiting, right? God's forming you in his kingdom. My identity and my inheritance is that I have a father. I have a father who's promised me eternity in paradise, forever, redemption, grace. I'm a son of the Most Holy, and that's my new identity. And I didn't have that identity growing up.
Point 0.0003%. 0.003%. That's 3/100,000ths of a percent. That's the number of people in the world that will ever claim the title of Army Ranger. My friend sitting with me not only has been an Army Ranger, but that isn't even the thing that most defines this man's life. I am so excited to introduce you to Tim Gurule. Because of the impact he's had on my life, I am 100% certain that by the end of this episode, you will walk away with something that has the potential of changing your life. And I want to start near the beginning of his life, because this man wasn't born with a golden spoon in his mouth. Tim, tell us about your experience growing up, how difficult that was, and how that has informed the decisions that you've made going forward, including becoming an Army Ranger.
Well, first of all, Alan, thanks for having me here. And just so the audience knows, my name is Tim Gurule, and you and I are good buddies because we met in a cool little mastermind called GoBundance. And before I break into like who I am and, where I came from, I want to say first and foremost that, Alan, I see you as such a mentor unofficially. I know you're probably like, who, me? Just because you have such humility, but I see you and what you're doing and just your absolute tenacity and ability to go reach for what you want and execute. And I know that you're scared. There's days that you're scared, and the ability you have to suppress that, overcome that, move through that, that is truly what separates high level elite individuals from those who just are satisfied with being mediocre. And so from the sidelines watching you and your journey, I can't even express to you how much of a mentor you've been to me. And I look at you and I think to myself, man, I need to do more of what Alan is doing. I need to be more of what Alan is day to day, because you just have this insurmountable, it almost seems insurmountable courage to just go for things. And so, I'm sure I'll talk about being an Army Ranger, where I came from, but, I don't think that courage is linear, and it's not a copy paste model. You could say, oh, here's this dude who is a special operations combat veteran. I deployed multiple times, faced obviously imminent danger on every deployment, and that's great. But I look at the things that you're doing and I think to myself, like, where does he muster the strength to do that? Where does that come from? And so first and foremost, thank you for acting as a mentor before we get deeper into this episode.
Thank you for those kind words. And I can give you the key to that strength is just ignorance. I don't know usually what I'm getting into before I start.
Yeah. I wrote this down somewhere as like, the ignorance of like not knowing what was ahead, and like, I guess just being too stubborn to quit. So too stupid to know you can't do something, and then too stubborn to quit once you get in there and feel the pain of it, but there's always fruit on the other side of that. I was at a small group last night, and it broke out into a group discussion, and so many people were like, if I would have known, like, I can see God's hand through this path that I've walked, as I'm through it. But if I would have known how much pain I would have been involved on the front end, I don't think I would have done it. And I see life totally differently. The perspective that I look through, the lens that I see life through, is so much different than I wouldn't have done something if I would have known how painful it was. I see that pain as an opportunity to be shaped and formed by God, right? When I see pain ahead, I think, wow, this is really going to suck. But I know that at the end of this pain is this unbelievable fruit that's just waiting, right? God's forming you in his kingdom. And on the other side of that, you are becoming who you need to become for God's kingdom to grow. And so, I don't know, I just see it differently. I don't shy away from the pain. I just think, man, I wish I understood why, right? I wish I understood why, but I know, like, I'm faithful and confident that this is for a purpose. This is purposeful suffering. So, Alan, I had no idea that was a stat about becoming an Army Ranger. 0.003% is what you said?
0.003%, which I didn't even know how to say that. I had to Google, how do you say this number?
Well, that is incredible. Yes. So I spent the most formidable years of my life I got selected when I was very young. I left high school and I went to the military, and I was pointed out. I was physically fit. I wrestled. I played football. I swam. I was a 3-letter athlete all 4 years of high school. And so I went to the military. I remember 9/11 changed my life. The day that I watched the Twin Towers fall changed my life. My original plan was I thought I was always going to go to a military academy. And when 9/11 happened, I thought, I can't wait to graduate. I can't graduate fast enough because I'm going to miss this opportunity. I felt such a calling to go serve, right? And we can get into, how my views have, morphed and changed over time, but I just felt such a civic obligation. My nation was in a time of need. I think probably very similar to how veterans felt during Pearl Harbor in World War II, Yeah. And I couldn't leave fast enough. So forget college. I went to basic training, and I had perfect PT scores. I grew up, in the woods. So my marksmanship was really good. I was an expert marksman. I had a perfect PT score. And so I was singled out, and, I was chosen to go on to airborne school after infantry school. And then from there, my performance was, suitable enough that I was given the opportunity to go to a special operations selection program. And every day I felt like somehow I squeaked through the cracks. Like, I don't know how they don't know that I'm not supposed to be here. I felt like an imposter every single day. It was the most stressed psychologically I've ever been in my life. Just the ability that they have. I mean, the science that they put into breaking you down into thinking you're nothing is incredible, just pounding you perpetually, whether it be physical, sleep deprivation, emotional, psychological. And somehow, by the grace of God, at the end of that selection, period, I remained on the last day, and my name was called at selection, and I was given the coveted tan beret, and I had the opportunity to join a special operations unit where, I got to go execute some of the highest value targeted raids in the world, right? We got a list of assets from the government that said, hey, go find these people. It's a matter of national security. And so that was my childhood. That was, 18 through 24. And that forms you in a very particular way. And during that time, and I'm bringing this full circle here, during that time, my resume just started getting stacked with bullet points. I went to every specialty school you could think of. The government spent a lot of money on me. Okay. They spent money teaching me to be a very highly trained, efficient individual that was a weaponized arm of the government. And the other day, I keep this binder of everything that defined who I was, all the specialty schools, all the accolades, the awards, the promotions. And it didn't stop at the military. I got shoulder tapped by a 3-letter government agency to go work for them post-military. And I have all of those documentation records. And I eventually became a firefighter, and I was selected to work on a specialty truck, and I became a rescue diver. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And just yesterday, it's funny you bring this up. I picked up that binder. I keep it in a safe at my house. And I picked it up. I call it my I Love Me binder. And I was flipping through. And I thought to myself, like, how much does this mean to me now? There was a time in my life where that book had to come with me everywhere. Like, could you imagine if I lost all the documentation of these accolades? And it occurred to me yesterday, like, how much do these pieces of paper really mean to me anymore? It's cool. It'd be cool if my kids found it, but is this who I am? Does this identify me? Does this summarize who I am? And I just kind of imagined holding it over a cliff and letting the papers go. And I imagined like all of these pieces of paper flying out of this notebook. What would that feel like? And I felt indifferent. And I think the reason why, Alan, is because that's not my identity. It's just things that I've done. My identity and my inheritance is that I have a father. I have a father who's promised me eternity in paradise, forever, redemption, grace. I'm a son of the Most Holy, and that's my new identity. And I didn't have that identity growing up. And having that now is just such a breath of relief. It's such this gift of grace. It's like finding the eddy in the river when you're fighting the current, And so it's funny you bring that up, because I was just having this self-revelation yesterday. I was having some alone time down in the basement.
You called that your I Love Me book? Is that what that is?
My I Love Me book. Everybody had one in the military. They say, this is your I Love Me book. Every time you switch units, go somewhere, like, these are all your accolades. Keep it with you. When you check into your new unit, present this book. This is for your record. Because, the government, they keep track, but they lose things a lot. And so it was up to you to keep track of all of your records.
So you talked about that and also what's replaced that. And thank you for sharing that as well. That was absent as a child, though. You didn't have an I Love Me book, and you didn't have a knowledge of a Father in heaven that you have now who loves you. What was that like? And how does that influence how you parent now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I did not have that influence in my childhood. And when you don't have that peace, that sanctity of absolute truth, of knowing what your inheritance is, everything is viewed through the lens of things that are very worldly, okay? And things that are of value in this world tend to degrade very quickly. You're grasping at things. And there's this perpetual pattern of running in fear, of scarcity. You're looking over your shoulder, trying to escape. And you're constantly running away from what you're afraid of instead of focusing on what you're promised. And what that does is puts you into a cycle of scarcity mindset. I didn't know God as a kid. I did not. My parents said that they did, but they didn't. My mother was Jewish and my dad was pretty devout Catholic, and somehow they ended up married. And I don't fault them for that. Like, my parents were incredibly loving, good parents, incredible parents. They were always there. My dad was at every single sporting event. My dad gave me wealth in his time, right? If you really think about kids that came from households that really had a lot of means, I know my friends who had much more physical, security than I ever had, but their parents were never around. And they were removed from this just belief that no matter what they did, tried, failed, succeeded at, their parents were kind of agnostic. They're indifferent. And so I didn't have a lot in the way of identity in Christ as a kid. And I also didn't have a lot of means as a kid, but what I did have is the absolute love and time and support of my parents. Like beyond a reasonable doubt, I knew no matter what I did, I always had their support, and I will say that contributed to an absolute superpower later in life. It freed me psychologically to be able to try anything I wanted to try and know, like, what's the worst that happens? Like, I don't succeed. I still have people who love me, support me, believe in me, and I can try again. Now, as far as parenting today, I think my parents did the best job that they knew how, and they did a great job. But our job as fathers, as husbands, as parents, our job is to make our children better prepared than we were. Our job is to make them smarter, more educated, not necessarily better off in the sense financially. I don't really think our job is to give children things. I think that our job is to prepare them psychologically and spiritually for the world that lays ahead. It's a lie if you tell your kids that the world is not a hard place. It is. It's difficult, and it's going to get harder. And so what do you put your identity in? What do you rest your identity in? And spiritually, how are you submitting in that as a parent? I think makes a big difference. And so what I really try and focus on is like, am I parenting in the Spirit, in the Holy Spirit, or am I parenting like out of a worldview of the way things should be because I just want it to be that way?
I love the absolute focus that you have on your faith. That's inspiring to me, and I appreciate that. A couple of times already in just a few minutes that we've been talking, you've talked about during your time as a ranger, the mental, psychological challenges that you went through. Again, preparing your children for the psychological challenge they're going to face. Now you're at a place where you've been through those things. What are the challenges that you're facing now? Because from the outside looking in, it'd probably be pretty easy for somebody to look and be like, look, this guy's got this I Love Me book that's full of all these amazing things. He's a top 100,000th of 1% guy. There's nothing that he should be worrying about. Everything's taken care of. He has this faith. And yet, I know from my own experience, that doesn't mean that you're immune to challenges, especially because life doesn't stay the same. And we do things sometimes intentionally and sometimes out of ignorance that challenge us. Both of us have a podcast now. That's been a huge mental challenge for me. Alan, go stand in front of this microphone and talk to people and ask questions and now share your story too. That's a challenge every single time I turn on the screen and light up the mic. So what are the challenges that are facing you right now, and who is supporting you through those challenges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is a very interesting question because I'm constantly wrestling between a couple of things. Number one is spirituality, like how's God leading me? Number two is ego. Okay, which one is winning? Like sometimes I'll feel like I'll pray into something and I'll be called a certain way. But then when I really dig into it deeper, I'm like, man, is that my ego just telling me I should be doing this thing? Like, what is God saying? And then I also have this battle with like the metaphysical, meaning, and you caught me at a really weird time because I'm like processing a few different things. I'm like into a couple different books right now that are twisting my brain up a little bit. But the metaphysical, it really speaks into like things are as you say they are. Any limitation that you speak into something, you allow it to persist. So if it's going to be easy to go raise money and build a fund that, builds out a need in Southern California for ADUs, it will be. The metaphysicist says it will be. Why do you think it's going to be hard? If you speak it as being hard, it will be hard. And then, God tells us spiritually, like, my yoke will be easy. Like it will feel easy. You'll just feel this natural affinity towards the direction that you should be traveling. And where I kind of get stuck in the middle is like, what's ego? And then what's spirituality? And what's metaphysical? I'm a big believer in mindset, but I don't believe in mindset to supersede, what is biblical doctrine? Like, what does God say first? But then I want to sprinkle on some metaphysical. So a lot of Christians kind of get stuck in like, oh, that manifestation, that's not of God. I don't buy that at all. I do think mindset is hugely important, but I think the root of mindset needs to be, are you spiritually aligned? Is God leading you in this? And I'll just give you, I'm just going to pull my pants down where I am on my journey right now. Everything that I accomplished in my earlier phase of life was done so extremely negatively. Okay. I beat the crap out of myself psychologically. I'm in a phase right now of life where I am a rocket ship. I've launched into outer orbit. I've separated from the first stage booster, and I'm ready to engage the second stage. I have absolutely no GPS coordinates. I have no idea where I'm going, what I'm doing. Stage one was amazing for getting me where I needed to go. I would, if I fell behind on a run during selection, I would destroy myself mentally. You're worthless. You fat piece of crap. You're not good enough to be here. You suck. Everybody knows you suck. You shouldn't be here. I use that in stage one to internalize, drive faster, pull harder, do more, do better, work hard. Work's over. Guess what? You're putting in the extra hours. You're not good enough. Nobody thinks you're good enough. That drove me. I used that as fuel. I came from a family where my dad was kind of the outcast. My cousins were always seen as, kind of superior. They had very good college educations, biochemical degrees, law degrees. Their parents had good jobs. My dad was like kind of this black sheep of the family. It put a chip on my shoulder. So in the beginning of my life, my journey was really shame. I was running away from shame of coming from a broken marriage, shame of, not having enough, shame of sleeping in a car, shame of not having money for school lunch. Like, why didn't my parents just apply for the program to help me get lunch money? Why didn't they do that? Instead, I'm like sitting in a lunchroom with no lunch, shame, shame, shame. That shame fueled a fire. It lit stage one in that jet engine, okay, to get me into outer orbit. And it really pushed me through the period of suffering. I needed it more. I had no optionality. There was no going back. I had no safety net. When I left home for the Army, if I failed, what was my option? In my brain at that time, I had no other option. The ships were burned. It was forward, only forward. And I had to be in this community to prove to my family, to my friends, that I was worthy. And even when I got there, I still felt unworthy. It pushed me to join a 3-letter government agency. It pushed me to, invest in real estate and make more money and grow a portfolio to show them, look, I'm good enough. I'm good enough. I'm good enough. But really what happens is like when you're looking over your shoulder in scarcity and fear, you end up getting off course and running in a circle. If you're paying attention to what you're running away from, where your focus goes, the energy flows. And when I had this epiphany of like, wow, what got me to level 1 can no longer serve me anymore. I have to release stage 1 of that rocket ship and totally reconfigure who I am, how I talk to myself, that inner voice, what my identity is. And this is where my walk with Christ really came along is I understood my inheritance. I understood what my future was, what my identity was supposed to be. And it wasn't in physical possessions, material things. It wasn't in, fear of running from shame to prove to people that I was or wasn't a certain thing. My inheritance was in my spiritual alignment with Christ. And when I realized that, it provided a huge relief. But the problem that I'm facing right now is, and the psychological stress that I'm in right now, and it's temporary, and I know it's temporary, but just being very open and vulnerable. And when I was a kid, and you close your eyes and you'd say, when I'm 40, I'm going to be at this place doing this thing. I'm going to live this life. I'm going to be in this house driving this car. I don't have one single thought or memory of what that was supposed to look like. All I can remember is laying in the back of a car at night thinking, I know what I'm not going to do. I know what I'm not going to be. And so here I am. I've released stage 1 of this rocket ship. I'm totally fueled up. I have the skill set and the tools to go to Mars or beyond, and I have no GPS coordinates. And I'm kind of like a fueled up rocket ship with no destination. As soon as that target comes into place, boom, let's launch. I'm ready to go. Like, let's go colonize. But I don't know what that is yet. And that is hugely frustrating for me. And that's my biggest struggle right now, psychologically, because I feel like I'm wasting time. That's a lie. It's a lie from the enemy. It's a lie from the devil. I want to speak that out loud. I'm filtering that. But that's where I'm at right now.
Do you have to know it all up front?
No, you don't.
You have to have that destination. And how does that affect the actions that you're taking? And here's where that question comes from is I think for a long time, I didn't have any idea where I was headed. I had a very vague idea of where I wanted to end up, but it certainly wasn't clear. And you and I have had this conversation before. It wasn't until maybe 6 months ago, in fact, exactly 6 months ago, that I put together a vision board that now not only do I look at it every day, but I have recorded a letter writing to myself about what I'm going to feel like, what I'm going to look like, what I'm going to experience when this comes together. And I'm wondering if maybe forming that clearly for you isn't because you're afraid of what it might look like. My vision board scares me to death. I look at that, not as much anymore, but when I first wrote it down and built it, the very first thought, and I'm going to get emotional just saying this, was you are totally not capable of anything on this page. And I can so resonate with that first stage of your booster rocket where you accepted that and then you would whip yourself with it, right? And there's some form of like, well, I'm going to prove that I can do it. And you're pushing to get there. So is there an element of fear that is preventing you from really clarifying that, because then you would have to believe it and you'd have to accept a different identity?
That's a really good question. And I was going to ask you, what scared you about your vision board? And you just said, you felt incapable of it. This is a complex issue. I don't feel incapable. I feel frustrated. I feel pent up and frustrated because I feel like I am a pendulum, like I'm a wrecking ball, and I've been towed to the top, just like in physics class in high school. I have all of this kinetic energy, or I'm sorry, potential energy waiting to be converted into kinetic energy. I feel it. It's pulling me. It's like gravity. When am I going to be released? When's this wrecking ball going to be released? And then what exactly is it? I mean, I could sit here and say, I fantasize sometimes about being the president of the United States of America. That's insane. That makes me sound like a crazy person. I close my eyes and I see myself speaking to the nation. I see myself, leading a nation through hardship and hard times and giving them direction. And do I say that to everybody? Well, I mean, I'm saying it on this podcast, so now I sound like a lunatic. But the point is like, I don't see myself as not capable in certain situations. I'm very aware of my limitations, and I'm very, very quick to recognize somebody's natural ability, like intelligence and capability. There'll be people, especially in our network, they walk in a room, and I will absolutely, instead of feeling threatened by them, say, wow, that is an impressive individual. They have this ingredient that is incredible. Like they worked hard for that ingredient or was naturally gifted. I don't feel scared. I just feel frustrated because I don't have a clear vision. And, I guess I'm looking at a compass that's spinning around. I could go anywhere. I could go this way. I could go that way. I could go this way. I'm going to get to the destination. It's going to be fun. There's going to be tons of adversity, and we're going to climb mountains and, get attacked and, starve for a period of time. But ultimately, like, I know the adventure is going to be fun, and the adventure is in the value. I just don't know which way to go. I'm just stuck and I'm spinning in a circle,
If one of your kids were in that same place, what advice would you give?
That's a really good question. And you and I have kind of had this conversation before. And honestly, part of this answer, I don't want to admit out loud, because I would largely stop doing a big part of one thing that I'm doing in particular. One of the major revenue generators for me, I would probably stop doing it. And I'm okay stopping to do it. I just don't know what I would replace it with. If my child was in this situation, I would really just encourage them to pray into, number one, where they feel God leading them. Like, what's easy? Like, where is your natural leadership ability? Like, what is just natural to you that you try to overcome with humility because maybe you are scared of walking that road? What I mean is, like, what do people naturally listen to you about? How are people drawn to you? What are people, asking your advice about? Why do they want to connect with you? There are things in our lives that, it's just so evident. It's apparent. It's natural. I think a lot of times we downplay it with humility. So I would encourage my kid to really pray, like, hey, what's God, spend some time with God, just communing with God, not asking for a blueprint, and honestly, I would tell my kid, you don't need to have all the answers figured out, which sucks. I don't want to hear this to myself, so I'm going to do it anyways. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to keep taking steps forward, be open to the corridor of possibility. And what I mean is like when you start walking down the hallway, you see that sequentially more and more doors become opened up. Doors that become available to you that wouldn't have been available if you didn't just start taking the first step. But I would say focus communally on just sitting at God's feet and not asking what he wants of you, what you're supposed to do, but just communing, spending time with God. Just like if my son were to come in the room, I don't want him to say, Dad, how can I serve you right this moment? Tell me what to do. I'll go do it. I'll build it. I just want to be with my son. And I would imagine that's how God wants to be with us. And so I would probably really encourage my kid to do that, but do that while they keep their feet moving. And probably identify things that they just feel absolute friction to. Like, how can we start eliminating the friction? Because I think naturally we're going to slide into what we're supposed to be doing. It's frustrating for a person like me, though, because like I want it now. I like put my rucksack on my back. Let's go. We have a timeline to get to this target. Like, I will carry the load. Give me your rucksack too. Let's go. So I think patience is definitely something I need to be working on. You didn't tell me we were having a counseling session on this podcast episode.
You never know where this is going to go. Plain success just happens naturally. So I'm going to agree with what you just said. And I'm also going to push back a little bit because while I agree as a dad that I would love my kids to come and sit with me, and I also don't expect to tell them what direction to go at every stage of their life. What I expect of myself is that when they make a decision, I'm going to be there with them through that process. So what I'm really curious about is if the I don't think God is just like, hey, I'm not going to give you this answer, Tim, because I just want you to be frustrated. I don't believe that's true. What I do think might be happening is there's an abundant life for everybody out there. There is for you. It doesn't matter very much what direction you go, because you're going to find abundance and joy and happiness because you've programmed yourself for that. You've accepted Christ, and you're going to be blessed whatever direction that you go. At some point, you have to pick the direction and just ask for support. You have to say, I am putting on my rucksack and I'm going this direction. And if at some point on that trail, I'm going to run into danger, I'd like protection, or I'd like help, or I'd like support.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point right now. And I guess if I could verbalize a limitation I have, like a fear, you want to know a fear I have of just like going for something? It's, you and I share this. It's integration, okay? I'm a big visionary. Like, dude, give me a wall-sized canvas and paintbrushes, and I'm going to make a huge mess. Let's go. Like, I'm going to paint a picture. I'm going to get people on the bus. Like, I'm going to tell this amazing story, and we're all going to be bought in, and everybody's going to be rowing the same way. And then I look around, and I'm like, who's going to come clean up this mess now? I think a big part of my hesitation is integration. I think I'm every day I'm like looking, every person I meet, I'm like, are you the person? Are you the person? I know that I am not the complete puzzle, and I need somebody to like keep it going. I'll get it started. I'll get the momentum. I just need somebody with me that is strong where I'm weak. And I think that's a big part of my fear. If we're identifying friction points and fears, that's a big part.
I think also because I just had this conversation like 3 days ago with someone else, it's also being able to trust your vision with someone else, that they're not going to look at this canvas that you just painted, this wild vision. And not only are they not, you're trusting them not to clean up the mess, you're trusting them not to tear the paper off the wall and crumble it up and prove to you that it wasn't a good vision, or it wasn't something. If that person showed up and was like, you can't accomplish this, and they crumble it up and throw it on the floor, you're crushed, right? Because now you go back to that identity. And I think that's absolutely critical, finding that person. And I guess my question would be, what intentional steps are you taking in that direction? It sounds like you're looking for people. I only know one way to succeed. And I would actually share this with someone. So way back when I was in the car dealership, we became the #1 car dealership in the country for 4 years in a row with one particular lender that we were working with. And they sent somebody from their headquarters out because they were going to do a big national meeting, and they wanted to know how we built the dealership out of a junkyard. Like we literally, and the junkyard caught fire a few months after we started. So we took this junkyard on fire and turned it into the #1 dealership in the country. And they sent somebody out to figure out what we were doing. What did we figure out that no one else in the country was doing, especially given the resources that we didn't have? And I said, I have a very simple formula for success. When I show up, my partner and I pray together. And then we get up and we work as hard as we can, and we treat people that come in the door the way that we would want to be treated. And that's it. That's my 3-step formula for success. We pray hard, we work hard, and we treat people right. And she looked at me and she says, I can't go back and tell them that. And I said, well, then you have a problem, because I'm not that smart. I certainly don't have the financial resources that all of the other dealerships that I'm crushing have. That's what I do. And when I was in the darkest period of my life not that long ago, I still have the note card sitting. I could reach out and grab it right now. That I wrote down the 3 things that I needed most, and I just prayed about those every single day. And so as you talk about manifesting or prayer or faith or whatever somebody wants to call it, not everybody shares the faith that we have, and that's okay. It can be called manifesting, it can be called faith, it can be called having a vision, whatever it is. But I think for me anyway, the only way I've ever really had the success is to boil that down into really 1, 2, or 3 very clear things and focus 100% on that until that problem is solved. And miraculously, those questions, those problems, those challenges seem to take care of themselves pretty quickly. I would even be willing to bet there's probably already somebody not that far from you that is ready and willing for that opportunity as soon as you're ready to receive it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, if there's a limiting belief, you asked me this question, this is how we got on this subject of, this topic anyways, I think there's also a little bit of mental shifting going on for me as well, of, I guess, really believing that I have value that's worthy to other people to be that in that role, like, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this is a big entrepreneurial thing, is like, I feel like I faked everything. It's like, you can have the balance sheet and the net worth and, yeah, part of it feels faked. I don't know if you experience that ever, but
Yeah. Yeah. You have the accolades. You have,
yeah,
what do you mean if I've experienced it ever? I think I experience that every single day.
yeah. And so part of me is like, oh my gosh, what the heck would anybody want from me? I know that's a lie, Alan, but you know, I bet that a big part of that is like, what do I have? What's my value to other people? And it's way easier. It's way easier for you to tell me what my value is than for me to see it right off the bat, you know?
I literally have written down as one of my goals for this year. I think I've learned self-love, and I think you have too. What I've written down as one of my goals for this year is resilient self-worth. And I'm not even sure what that means or how to get it. I'm reading some books right now that I hope will help, but I want to combat that inner voice that tells you that you're an imposter, that you don't belong, that limits you from seeing the value that you have. And it's not ego, it's just recognition of I'm unique, I'm special, I'm talented, I'm knowledgeable. Whatever those I ams are that build up who the person is, that doesn't change with the rise and fall of income, doesn't change with the rise and fall of balance sheet, because we both have experienced that. I mean, I would love to say that you've just been a rocket ship. So you told me your trajectory has only been up, but I've been more like, I think I sometimes release the first stage and then crash back down to earth, and they had to rebuild me and then they relaunch again. And at some point we'll figure out how to get out of the atmosphere. But I think that's a challenge that, well, statistically, and this is from one of the books I was reading, I think it's like 70 something percent of men don't feel worthy of what they have. And it's higher for women. It's like in the 80 or 90 percentile. It's a huge challenge, I think, no matter what we're facing, especially as you begin to experience some success. I think from the outside looking in, people look and like, man, Alan, you're flying airplanes to San Diego, you're investing in property, you've got life figured out. And the reality is there's times I'm in the airplane, like, I'm just like, I can't believe that I'm doing this, that they let me climb in this thing and take off. And they believe that I'm capable of doing it. Or as, you know, the first time we bought $1 million house in San Diego, it took me 2 or 3 days to be okay with that, not, the numbers were fine. I can read a spreadsheet. It was going to work, but I had to adapt to the mental piece that Alan Underwood could buy $1 million house. And because I had never been that version of me before, and it was super scary.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It is, yeah. And I think like the better equipped we are to deal with that, right? To rebalance that, to reshape, you know, the lens of perspective that you look through, the faster that we level up. And I think, you know, it's interesting as you start the entrepreneurial journey and you realize that the biggest limitation is you. It's personal development. It's not business, but the business can't progress past you, you know. It's dependent on you, like your development, you know, your beliefs, your belief system, your values, you know, who you are, how you see yourself, how you speak to yourself. It's a pretty crazy, it's an unexpected uh I guess journey, right? I don't know how many people are aware of that when they first start.
I certainly wasn't. I still think I'm not that aware of, you know, because when I look at, because right now it's more about what do I need to become. I know what I'm capable of achieving, just like you. I know what talent and ability and skills I have. I also know that I am the thing that's holding me back. And
Yeah.
so, what are the parts of me that I have to let go? And what are the new parts that I have to acquire in order to become the person that I want to become? And I know that you felt that way. I do have another question, though, that I don't think I've asked you about this, is how big a factor in the success that you're experiencing now, your love for yourself, the opportunities that are in front of you, have some root in the relationship that you have with your wife?
Oh, Everything. I think first and foremost, if I didn't know God and love God, I wouldn't have got the wife that I've got. I mean, if you're sitting out there and you're like, oh man, I don't want to be single. Being single sucks. You have this vision of a partner, whether you're a woman and you're looking for a husband, whether you're, man looking for a wife. If you have this vision of a partner that you believe you deserve, that you're just dying to have, why don't you have this partner? Well, I think first you need to ask yourself, are you a person that's worthy of having that partner's love and affection? Because if you're not, you should fix that first. God is not going to give you this wife that you envision in your mind if you're not worthy of stewarding her heart, of guarding her heart, protecting her heart. So first and foremost is like, are you spiritually in alignment to be deserving of a partner like that? If you're not, get your crap together. And then once you are, it's amazing when that person shows up. You become who you need to become. There's nothing I could be doing right now. I take big swings, Alan. I'm taking big swings. I think we're currently, I'm out finding private investors. We're raising money for hard money loans. We're doing like private lending. Okay. Not so much hard money, but private lending. So just kind of specialty, boutique lending projects for deals that have weird stuff, a little hair on the deal, second lien positions, things like that. My wife, we went from zero rental portfolio to being married and accelerating our rental portfolio. By 1 year, we bought 6 units 1 year. And I know that's not massive to some people, but from going from nothing to 6 units 1 year and then continuously buying. And I've put my family in some precarious situations, which is going to happen inevitably as you're learning, as you're growing as an investor. You make bad deals, those deals become learning opportunities and SOPs. I will tell you right now, if I didn't have the love and support of my wife that keeps me faithful, steady, grounded, that is graceful when I make mistakes, that is loving, that is supportive, there is not one tiny fragment of a chance I could be doing what I'm doing. Having a partner, a marriage with somebody who just is in the boat with you, side by side, holding your hand at night, praying together with you, calming you down, reassuring you. My wife, there's been times where I was so destroyed by a decision I made in this journey, and my wife would be in bed at night whispering in my ear that I'm worthy, that I'm capable, that God has big plans for me, that she's proud of me. Does anybody understand, if you're listening, do you understand what kind of an advantage I have over you if you don't have that? It's a superpower. But conversely, if you choose wrong, it's the millstone that drowns you. Like, it's either a superpower or it's what sinks the ship. And without a doubt, Alan, my wife, hands down, deserves all the credit, if not more, for where we are today. Besides God, outside of God.
That's awesome, Tim. You said something that just made my mind explode, that you have to be worthy to guard the heart of the woman or the man that you're given. You were trained professionally to protect your life and the life of others that were with you. And there were very specific tactics that you would employ to do that. How do you guard the heart of your wife? What are the specific tactics that you employ to make sure that her heart is safe with you and protected from all the garbage that's out there in the world? How do you keep her safe?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, prayer. God is like in the house at night. We pray before bed. Christ is the center. My wife wrote me a card. I went to bed last night and, I ended up going to bed later. I was in bed by myself. Right on my nightstand is a card handwritten by my wife. I open it up and she just is speaking into how proud she is of our household, that God's at the center, driving our decision, driving our parenting, that the Holy Spirit is like in our home. And I will tell you, guarding somebody's heart physically, guarding somebody physically, like what the government trains you to do, is a very different application practically than what your wife or your family needs. And if there's one tool in particular that I could point to that has been the biggest help and influence in my life in this, it was given to me by my stepdad, my bonus dad, I call him, and it is a book written by I'm sorry, not Stephen Covey. Oh my gosh. What's the author? You'll know. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What is that? Who's the author?
Isn't that Covey?
Is it Covey? Yeah, it is Stephen Covey.
Well,
yeah.
If it isn't, right. We're giving Covey credit for it, and we'll look it up and put it in the show notes.
Hands down, the most influential book in my marriage of how to guard my wife's heart. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Not only does that book speak into all relationships in life, but my wife in particular. And it really talks about watering the plant, right? Overdrafting the bank account emotionally, making sure that you're depositing consistently and not just doing it for accolades or to get what you want, but doing it because you care, putting in the work and watching the fruit that blossoms out of that perpetual work. Happiness is hard work. Marriage is hard work. But I don't know of one single thing that we covet that isn't worthy of that hard work. The most valuable possessions we own can't be bought. It's a strong marriage. It's a fit body, spirituality, a close relationship with God. Having ears to listen, right? To seek to understand before you are understood. Listening to my wife, helping my wife, listening to what she's saying, internalizing it, and implementing it. And I'll tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not perfect. I fail constantly at this. Every day, I fail at it. But it's having the mindfulness to keep implementing that, asking for God for the grace where I fall short, and then most importantly, asking my wife for that same grace and knowing like, hey, I'm sorry I fell short. I'm going to do better next time. That is how I personally have learned to guard my wife's heart. And it wasn't something that I was taught. I don't think it's inherent or natural, but it's something that you have to work at. And it's definitely worth working at because the fruit on the other side of that work is absolutely worth it.
100%. I couldn't echo more what you're saying. And it is hard work. I don't know what your default setting is, but my default setting is not share my emotional state, listen closely, express, especially verbally, love and appreciation. Those things are hard for me. It sounds so simple, but it is way easier to go out in the world and kill something and drag it home than it is to take just a few minutes and listen. Do you have intentional practices built around that? I can share mine. My wife and I walk together for an hour every morning. And for the most part, that is giving her an opportunity to download and me an opportunity to learn how to listen. And it has become one of the most valuable treasures of my day and of our relationship. We also go on date nights. I would love to say that that is happening every week. It isn't happening every week, but it is very intentional and it's on the calendar, and we do it as often as possible, which usually ends up about 2 or 3 weeks out of the month. So what are some of your tactical practices to overcome some of your weaknesses in those areas that we can share?
Yeah, so I'm in a very different season of life than you. I have 3 kids, 2 of which are, one's 4 and one is 1. So we're in it. We have a 13-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So we're in it with kids, right? And so, date night once a week, I'll just be honest with you, it's not happening at all. But it is calendared once a month. Once a month, it's like a hard rock in the calendar, we're going out. However, every Thursday, my wife and I, we sit down, we put the kids to bed early, and this is going to sound so dorky, but we do a budget review. Every Thursday, her and I, we sit down, we go over our budget. It gives us clarity on where we're at, what expenses we have coming up. It sounds dumb. I'm telling you, it sounds dumb. It's been the best tool for our marriage, hands down, because we're on the same page. We're in the boat, we're all in the same direction. And then after we're done with the budget, we sit and we talk, usually, half hour, an hour. And it really just gives my wife an opportunity to kind of like, my wife, she likes to be heard, and who doesn't, right? And it's an opportunity for her to be heard and me to listen. And then we stretch together afterwards, which is silly too, but we go through like a 20-minute bedtime stretching routine for mobility. And that by far has been like one of the biggest tools. Calendaring a reoccurring date once a month. It's not every week, but it's once a month. And then, we do go for walks together too. We try to get walks in the evening with the whole family. And that's like me throwing a football with my son and my girls riding their bike or something like that. But my wife and I are walking next to each other and, just communicating, what's going on with the day, what's going on tomorrow. And so just communication. But I will tell you, if there's a breakdown in the relationship, it's just because not enough effort has been made on my part to make sure that that communication is up and efficient. You know, if there's a breakdown, it's normally because I'm busy. I don't want to stay up and communicate. I want to go to bed. I have things to do. And that's typically when we start to see the degradation of, you know, the efficiency of our relationship and really being friends. I think the better friends you are, the better your marriage is. If you're best friends with your wife, you tend to have a really fruitful marriage, and friends communicate often and regularly. You know, that it's not like every once in a while you kind of pop in to say, hey. It's like more communication that's necessary makes the best friendships. And I think if you're really focusing on having that open communication, you're going to be really good friends with your spouse, and it's going to produce some awesome fruit in your marriage.
I love it. It's very evident you have a great marriage, that it's a beautiful part of your life.
And I'm gonna be so bold to say that, like, I think I have a top 1% marriage. I really do. It's not perfect. My wife, if she's listening to this, she'll be like, "Are you serious? We have so many things. Like, you're crazy." I know. I see my friends, and it's not a comparison thing. I'm not making a competition, but I just know, like, I'd trade all my wealth in the world for a good, fruitful marriage. And I see my friends. I see it. I just recognize it. I know who's in love and who's not in love. I have a top 1% marriage, and there's no doubt about it. It's one of my most prized possessions all day long.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful to be in the same top 1% with you there. Sometimes some of the biggest blessings in our life are born from some of the biggest pain in our life, right? And your marriage is the byproduct of some really difficult pain for both of you, a shared painful experience. Do you mind sharing that a little bit? Not to highlight maybe the tragedy, but just to give hope to anybody who's going through a really difficult experience, that God doesn't do anything to us, right? It is all for us. And this is a beautiful illustration that I think people need to hear about.
Totally. Yeah, so I'll just give you a quick background on my wife. My wife grew up in Southern California, but she was born in Mexico. So my wife immigrated here when she was in elementary school. She went to Los Alamitos High School, and she fell in love with her high school sweetheart. Her high school sweetheart grew up, joined the Army, and wouldn't you know it, got selected to be in the same special operations unit that I did. And so during this time, it was the height of the war. We were continuously deploying overseas and coming home for short training breaks and then back overseas again. So just a sausage grinder of war. My wife, you know, and her late husband, Tommy, they got married. She moved up here to Washington. They had a young son together. And on his 5th deployment overseas, my now son was 18 months old, and he redeployed. And he was, you know, it was close to him coming home from deployment, and ended up getting into a vicious firefight in Afghanistan, 2012. And, you know, his actions that night were incredibly valorous and brave. And, you know, you can look up the firefight more in depth. There was accolades handed out for sure, but his actions that night were beyond self and self-preservation. He ended up getting shot and was killed in action. And on the radio call, he got shot through his vitals, and he was in what we call a kind of like a fatal funnel, where there was a high rate of fire. People, you know, his counterparts would have had to move through open space, exposed area to come get to him. And on the radio, you know, he made a net call on the radio that, you know, hey, he'd been shot in the leg. He was taking care of it. He knew full well he wasn't shot in the leg. It just speaks to his character and thinking of his teammates more than himself. But long story short is my wife's late husband was killed in action in 2012. And my wife had an 18-month-old son, and, you know, was young and was really kind of infantile in her faith as well. She just spent the next 7 years raising her son with God and leaning into that relationship and growing a relationship in Christ. And long story short is it's a small world when you come from that community. And some mutual friends from that community set us up on a blind date, which I was very apprehensive to go on at first because, you know, it felt weird to me, like, oh, I'm going on a date with Tommy's wife. It just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I finally broke down and we went to dinner. I thought, well, I mean, she's probably, you know, I'll just take her to, you know, as a friend, I'll just like take her to dinner and kind of check in on her. we went to dinner, and 9 months later we were married. And, that's a really fun story to just say out loud, but, we don't have that much time to get into it, but I can tell you, Alan, that in reflection, when you look at every single puzzle piece, every paving stone, every pebble on the road to our journey today, God's hand was in it the entire time, just guiding and weaving us through that. And it's just impossible to ignore. In our relationship, our marriage, everything was built on this centered foundation on Christ. And it's been a huge blessing, and it's evident.
Thank you for sharing that. I can't imagine some of the emotional journeys that you both have been through, and what a gift that you share that relationship with Tommy that then allows you to provide mutual support there. Not everyone gets to have that. And for her, to have someone that knows what his life was, what it was like, what his last moments would have been like, and to be able to understand that in a way is such a gift for her. I want to wrap things up. You know that one of the most influential people in my life was my dad, and we're nearing the 4-year anniversary of having lost him suddenly. And from that time until now, one of the overriding things that I remember is that he used to tell me, Alan, remember the little things. There are little things that make a big difference in each of our lives. What are the little things that you would like to pass on to anybody listening that will have a huge impact in their life?
I talked a lot about my dad, and I think if we're blessed enough to have good relationships with our dad, it's impossible to ignore the impact that they have on your life. And when you were talking about, he would kind of have this catchphrase with you, like, remember the little things. Something that my dad repeatedly would say to me every day. I'd go to school, he would hug me, he'd hold me back, he'd give me this big bear hug, he'd grab my shoulders and kind of put me at arm's length and look me in the eyes, and he'd say, son, think with your head. And he would tap my forehead. Think with your head. Follow your heart. He would tap my heart. And listen to your conscience. He would tell me that every single day, this mantra repeatedly, think with your head, follow your heart, listen to your conscience. And, I think about that. I think that, persists today. Like, it's something that I've always carried with me, and just this belief, specifically from my dad, that I could do anything I wanted to do. My dad pumped me up. He was like a hype man, I was like this little kid I was just a normal kid. My dad would sit there and tell me like how powerful I was, how capable I was, how I could be anything I wanted to be. And I can't express to you how meaningful and how powerful that is. And that's something that I try to impress on my own children now. And it's something that I really try to perpetuate and breathe life into other people with, is that you are capable of anything. You're a powerful individual. And then when you have that realization and you align that with, being in alignment with Christ, look out. I mean, come on, look out.
I love that so much. Tim, I love you. Thank you for sharing a part of your day with me. I am 100% confident that something that you've said, something that you've shared is going to make a big impact on someone's life. And thank you for being the type of person that can show up and do that. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
All right, everybody. This has been the Plain Success Podcast. And in the show notes, you will find any information you need to get in touch with Tim. He's making moves in the world. And if you are interested in making some moves, this is a man you need to be in touch with.
Come check out my podcast. It's called the Dynamis Podcast, DYNAMIS.
There we go. Tim Gurule is one of the most impressive men that I have the pleasure of knowing. His friendship inspires me. His life is an example for me. Tim has given his life in the service of others. The pilots of Angel Flight West give of their time, their talent, and their aircraft to help people in need of medical care far from home, and they do it for free. If you or someone that you love is in need of medical care and is struggling to figure out how to get the transportation to the help that they need, please reach out to Angel Flight West, www.angelflightwest.org. We want to serve and help you.